You're listening to our continuing coverage in the trial of Adam Montgomery. Let's go back to the courtroom now for segment number 4.
All rise for the jury, please. Not quite ready.
Back to the jury.
Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Kayla. My name's Caroline Smith. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. I have some questions to ask you about what you just testified to. First, I want to kind of get a bit of a timeline. You were arrested and incarcerated on charges in January of last year, right?
Yes.
That was 2022, right?
Yes.
And when you were incarcerated in January, and that was the welfare fraud that you referred to?
Yes.
And you were not able to make bail at that time, right?
Correct.
So you were incarcerated for a couple of months.
Yes.
And around April 13, 2022, you were arrested for receiving stolen property regarding the guns at the Fran residence, right?
Yes.
And you were still incarcerated at that time, right?
Yes.
And then you were not guilty of those charges, right?
No.
And you intended to fight those charges, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you were moving towards a hearing to fight the charges very early on in court, right?
Yes.
And before that hearing, or I think the hearing was postponed because you reached an agreement with the state on bail to get out, right?
Yes.
So that hearing was called a probable cause hearing, right?
Yes.
To see if the state had enough evidence to hold you or to actually charge you, right?
Yes.
And you didn't have that because you got the agreement on bail.
Yes.
And you did not, the guns involved, by the way, were receiving receiving or retain the property of another, a shotgun belonging to CF, which was, you knew to be Chris Frayne, right?
Yes.
Knowing it had been stolen or believing it probably had been stolen with the purpose to deprive Chris Frayne, right?
Yes.
And you got a second charge that was pretty much the same thing except for referring to a rifle.
Yes.
And you did not receive a shotgun that belonged to Chris Frayne, is that right?
Correct.
You didn't retain a shotgun belonging to Chris Frayne, is that right?
Yes.
You didn't receive a rifle belonging to Chris Frayne, right?
Right.
And you didn't retain a rifle belonging to Chris Frayne, right?
Yes.
You didn't possess any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
No.
You didn't control any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you didn't touch any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
Yes.
And you were charged with that anyway, correct?
Yes.
And you were out on bail based on your agreement with the state and didn't go forward with that hearing. So the bail then was 5,000 personal recognizance, right?
Yes.
And what that means is you don't actually pay up $5,000, right?
Right.
You don't actually have to pay any cash, right?
Right.
It is just a promise that you'll follow the conditions or they can hold you on the 5,000, right?
Yes.
And so you made a promise with them to follow certain conditions of bail, right?
Yes.
And that agreement was made on May 6th. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
And you got out on May 6th.
Yes.
So you had been in from January, February, March, and April, and then got out on May 6th.
Yes.
And on June 3rd, you sat down with police to talk to them, right?
Yes.
And you sat down with police of your own free will, right?
Yes.
That you had the services of an attorney, right?
Yes.
And that attorney was actually with there when you sat down with the police, right?
Yes.
And he was there to help you if you needed it, right?
Yes.
And you were on bail when you went there, right?
Yes.
But while you were there talking, or actually that morning probably earlier, you were charged with the perjury charges that you talked about, right?
Yes.
And so you stayed in jail for a couple of more days, but you got out a few days later on bail again, right?
Yes.
And on June 20th, this was after you talked to the police on June 3rd about those gun charges and what you said happened, right?
Yes.
And on June 20th, after your June 3rd conversation with police, you actually got indicted on receiving stolen property, right?
Yes.
The difference was the first charge was just the police writing up the charge and serving you and holding you. But on June 20, after you talked to the police,
Objection, Your Honor, counsel's testifying.
Overruled.
a grand jury, well, your case was presented to a grand jury and you got indicted, right?
Yes.
And you had not given the police any information on June 3rd that you received a shotgun belonging to Chris Frayne, right?
I don't remember.
You might have.
I said I don't remember.
Okay. Did you receive a shotgun from Chris Frayne?
I didn't know.
Okay. Did you tell the police on June 3rd that you got a shotgun from Chris Frayne?
No.
And you did not get a rifle, receive a rifle from Chris Frayne, right?
Right.
And you told them that, or your story included that you didn't receive a rifle from Chris Frayne, right?
Right.
And that you had not possessed any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
Right.
And that you had not controlled any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
Right.
And that you had not touched any of Chris Frayne's guns, right?
Right.
And you were still indicted after you talked to the police about all that on June 20th, 2022, right?
Yes.
And those were, by the way, the same charges that you had been served with back in April. Pretty much the same, right?
Yes.
And when you went to court or had a court date for arraignment on those charges, you pled not guilty, right?
Right.
Because you were not guilty, right?
Right.
And you had told the police on June 3rd that you were near the firearms, right?
Yes.
That you were in the same room as the firearms, right?
Yes.
That at some point you knew the firearms were there, right?
Yes.
but that you were just in a drug fog and weren't a part of that whole thing, right?
Yes.
And that all you wanted was to get some drugs from what was going on that you described, right?
Yes.
And you've always said that you're not guilty of those charges, right?
Yes.
And the state dropped the charges on November 18, 2022, right?
Yes.
And that was based on the agreement that you talked about in direct examination, right?
Yes.
For the other charges.
Yes.
And yet, I think you said that the receiving stolen property charges could still come back if you did something wrong, right?
Yes.
Now, I think I heard you testify that Kim Frayne freaked when she discovered the guns were missing and was calling around to everybody before Chris got home because she was frantic. Is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't tell the police that on June 3rd, right?
Right.
Okay. So I think your testimony is, and when would that be? Would that be like in the morning, noon, afternoon?
I don't remember.
Okay. But in any event, you found out that Kim had some missing guns because she actually called and said, there's missing guns. I've got to get them back before Chris gets home and finds out. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So, when you were arrested in April of 2022, you're entitled to get police reports and stuff like that about what you were arrested on, right?
Yes.
It was called discovery, right?
Yes.
And the discovery it contained police reports and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
So before you talked to the police on June 3rd, you were able to read what other people were saying was going on, right?
Yes.
And you were able to get a description of what other people had said? Is that right?
Yes.
And you were able to get a description of the guns, right?
Yes.
And you were able to get a description of what happened to the guns and whether they were found or not, right?
Yes.
And you read in discovery, well, no. You actually read in discovery that the names of people that you were telling the police came to your house, right?
They didn't come to my house. I don't remember that, but yeah.
Well, you told the police that 2 white guys had come to your house and Adam was selling them drugs for money. You don't recall their names, but you saw their names in the discovery, right?
Yes.
So this description of 2 white guys coming to your house was something that you had seen in discovery.
Yes.
Okay. Somebody else had talked about that in discovery. Is that right?
I don't remember.
And you told the police that these 2 guys were both white. You didn't remember their names until you saw it in the paper, meaning discovery, right?
Right.
And that you had kept thinking it was all about Manny, Ish, and Mike in that situation, right?
Yes.
So Your recollection was Manny, Ish, and Mike with the guns until you read discovery of what somebody else said, and then you started to think, oh, 2 white guys came over, right?
I wasn't thinking, I remembered.
Okay. Okay. And you actually told the police that you could recall Kim saying that her guns were stolen, right?
Yes.
And you had a recollection of Adam going to Kim's that night, right?
Yes.
And you had a recollection of Adam coming back that night, right?
Yes.
But you had no recollection of Adam bringing any guns in the house, right?
Right.
And so I think you testified on direct. Kim lives 10 minutes away, give or take. And you described Adam going to Kim's and coming back and describing to you what happened, right?
Yes.
And you said, I think on direct here, that her house was wide open. Her door was wide open, right?
Yes.
And when you talked to the police, you had a little bit more detail about that, right?
I don't remember.
Well, you said that Adam told you that he left and he came back and said that Kim's door was open and that the dog didn't even bark and Kim was passed out. Do you recall telling the police that?
Yes.
And so the detail about the dog didn't bark is something that you said that Adam said to you, right?
Yes.
Not something that you read in Discovery.
No.
And so Adam came home and said Kim's door was open, the dog didn't even bark, and she was passed out, right?
Yeah.
And he said Kim woke up and she said the guns were missing.
Yes.
And you repeated that more than once in your statement to police, right? On the 3rd.
Yes.
And you said that he had left around 10 or 11 at night, right?
Yes.
And that he had been gone for about 20 minutes, maybe as much as a half an hour.
Yes.
And that was something that you specifically recalled about Adam's absence that night, right?
Yes.
And so it was a pretty quick trip that he was gone and back, right?
Yes.
No more unusual than any other time that he may have gone over there to pick her up to help her get drugs or something.
No.
And in that 20 minutes to a half an hour, he said the door was open and Kim said the guns are missing, right?
Yeah.
So the 3rd time, well, you repeated it again. And again, I think that you said to the police a 3rd time that Adam came home about 20 minutes after he left and said the door was wide open, Kim was passed out, and Kim said the guns were missing and the dogs didn't even bark.
Yes.
Okay. And this seemed consistent with other things that you had read in Discovery, right?
I didn't read the full Discovery. I just saw a couple of names.
Okay. Okay. Well, you said that when you were charged with receiving, you hadn't done it, right?
Right.
And you hadn't touched the guns, possessed, or controlled them in any way, right?
Right.
And so you wanted to find out what somebody else had said to make them think that you had received or retained, the police had received or retained them. I lost myself on that question. Let me rephrase it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But when you were charged with receiving something you knew that you had never done, and you had access to the police reports, you kind of wanted to know what people were saying about you that got you arrested on those charges, right?
Yes.
So you reviewed that discovery.
I didn't review the whole discovery.
Okay. Just you wanted to see what people were saying that made the police arrest you, right?
Yeah, my lawyer showed me a couple of sentences in it that he highlighted, but I didn't see the whole thing.
Okay. Okay. And so you talked to your lawyer about what people were saying that got you arrested.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you told the police back in June that you first learned that the guns were in the house the day that Kevin O'Leary came over. Do you recall that?
No.
Okay. I'm going to show you a copy of, there was a transcript of your interview. Did you review that before trial?
No.
Did you review the content of the interview with the state before testifying here?
No.
Okay, I'm going to show you, well, a copy of the transcript of your recording. Let me also clarify this. When the state was talking about your conversation with the police on June 3rd, he kept referring to it as a proffer, but it was a question and answer situation where you were talking about the guns, right?
Yes.
I'm going to show you. Give you a chance to look at this. This is a recording of Kayla Montgomery interview part 1. And then I lost my page with my finger there. And here I have a proffer interview with Kayla Montgomery, second half, 6/3/2022, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to show you page 156, I think I said, and ask you to review it, and then I'm going to ask you a question, okay? Now, you can feel free to review any part of that you want, but I'll be asking you a question about page 156, okay? Starting from there and down.
Okay.
Take your time. Okay, you ready for me to ask?
Yeah.
So when you were doing that question and answer with the police, one of the officers asked you, and do you remember Detective Rahill?
No.
Name? No? Okay. One of the officers asked you, and when was the first time you found out that the guns were in the house? And you said, when, what's his name? When Kevin O'Leary, that I know of, came over, and then I found out that I thought that it was like Kevin came over, and then Ish and Manny and Mike came over, and Adam was like talking, saying, oh, look at these, look at these. Is that right?
Yes.
But you actually had on direct that Ish and Mike and Manny were over before Kevin O'Leary, right?
Yeah, I don't remember when they were always in the house and then gone, and then it's like a mixed up situation. You never know who's coming in and who's going out.
Okay, so actually that whole night is kind of a mixed up situation, right?
Yes.
Because after that night, when you learn the day that you learn the guns are in the house, and Ish and Mike and Manny are over and Kevin O'Leary's over, but after that you really didn't think about this case at all until you got arrested for it, right?
Right.
So that was like a one-day thing, and then you're off on other days of working and coming home with the kids and then doing drugs in the evening, right?
Yes.
And that particular day was not particularly standout after it was over, right?
Right.
Okay. And for the most part, as long as you had drugs, you weren't caring what was going on around you, right?
Right.
Okay. No idea how things got so messed up there, sorry. So, you told the police you first learned that guns were in the house when Kevin O'Leary came over. By the way, do you also know Kevin O'Leary as Kevin LaBelle?
I found that out. I didn't know that was his name too.
How'd you find it out?
The cops told me.
Okay. So the cops gave you some information too about your case that you didn't know?
Yeah.
And you also, and I think you said it on direct, that Adam had not, when you were there and Adam came home from Kim's, you saw him come in and he didn't have the guns on him, right?
Right.
But then you said that he was in and out through the night, right?
Right.
And you also said on direct that Adam eventually told you what was going on?
Yes.
And I think that you said that Adam told you that he had ended up taking them to a friend's house, right?
Yes.
Now, this conversation that you're having with Adam about what's going on is after some things are going on with the guns up in the attic, right?
I don't remember.
Well, he didn't tell you, in your story, he doesn't say anything about what happened at Kim's, other than he went there, the door was open, Kim was asleep, the dog didn't bark, and he woke her up and she said the guns were missing, right?
Right.
And then sometime after you're discovering there's something going on with guns in your attic, you confront him about it, right?
Right.
That's what you told the police, right?
Right.
And he told you that he had taken them to a friend's house, right?
Right.
And you didn't see him bring them in the house, right?
No.
So if you took him to a friend's house, the going in and out was just normal going in and out, right?
Yeah.
And at some point or other, they end up in your attic, right?
Yes.
And Manny, Ish, and Mike were over.
Yes.
And Manny, Ish, and Mike were talking about the guns.
Yes.
And the guns were there at the house when Manny, Ish, and Mike were there at the house.
Yes.
Right? But you never saw how the guns got in the house.
Right.
And still, with Adam taking guns to a friend's house, as you say he said, it was still a pretty quick trip to Kim's and back, right?
Yes.
And you say that at some point you confront Adam about the guns, right?
Yes.
And you have said sometime the next day, Kim is calling around, freaking out because the guns are missing and Chris is not home.
Right.
And when he gets home, he's going to be upset.
Right.
So, you don't know what day that was, right?
No.
Okay, but fair to say that this is going on before Chris gets home, right?
Right.
Because you say that Kim is trying to find out what happened so that she can take care of it before Chris gets home. Right?
Yes.
She doesn't want Chris to know that the guns are missing in your story, right?
Right.
And that she was calling around to everyone, including you, in your story, right?
Yes.
And so you say that you confront Adam, and he tells you that he finds Kim asleep, the door's wide open, the dog doesn't bark, and he finds the guns and takes them out to the car, and then he comes back in and wakes Kim up and says the first thing that she says when he wakes her is that the guns are missing. That's what he told you?
Yes.
And that's sort of what you were telling the jury on direct, right?
Yes.
And it's sort of the same thing that you said that he told you that night when he got home, but just added the thing about the gun, right?
Right.
And so you've been to Kim's house, right?
Yes.
And you've been inside,
Yes.
I think you said 4 or 5 times?
Yeah, something like that.
And you knew that Kim and Chris were living in the same house, but not really so well together, right?
Right.
And she was sleeping on the couch, right?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay. Well, in any event, you've been in there, you've been in her living room. There's not a gun case in the living room, right?
Right.
There's no guns on the wall or on display in the living room, right?
Right.
And if you were in the living room and you suddenly woke up, well, if you were in the living room, you wouldn't notice whether guns were missing in the rest of the house because you never would have seen them in the living room, right? Oh, that was terrible. Let me try again. Okay. If you're in the living room, you don't see guns while you've been there, right?
Right.
They're not visible in the living room, right?
No.
Okay. At least for however they've kept them while you've been there.
Right.
And you also told police that you did see the guns, right?
Right.
So, like, right after it happened, right?
Yeah.
Meaning kind of the next day after Adam came back from Kim's place, right?
Yeah.
And you told the police that you saw the guns, and it was there when people were in your house, like Ish, Manny, and Mike. You didn't know what kind of guns, but the guns were in the house, right?
Right.
When the three of them were there.
Right.
And you had not seen how they got in the house.
Right.
And I think I heard you say on direct that Mike was there, and Mike, did you say he's never alone or he's always with somebody?
He always has somebody with him. When he came to the house, he was always had somebody with him.
Okay, not necessarily Ish and Manny, right?
Not that I remember.
Okay. So Ish and Manny may have come over at some point, and then Mike and whoever was with him at another point that same day after Adam had gone to Kim's.
Right.
Okay. But whoever he had with him, you didn't necessarily know.
No.
Okay. And you told police that you saw an exchange with two white guys, right?
Right.
And one guy was the driver and the other guy had drugs and money, right?
Right.
And that they walked out of the house with both guns that day, right?
Right.
Was that Mike and whoever goes with him?
No.
Okay. So Mike is there, but it's another set of people that go, I think you call it a transaction?
Right.
So it's Mike, Ish, and Manny might be there, but these guys are different people, two white guys, right?
They weren't there during that transaction.
Okay. Okay. Is that clear? Is
Yes.
that really, really clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there one? Okay. So, you didn't recall if you were in the room when the thing with the white guys happened, right?
Right.
That was up in the attic, right?
Right.
And you did say that they walked out of the house with both guns that day, right?
Right.
And that was sometime afternoon, after Adam was at Kim's house.
That was like weeks after. It
Weeks
wasn't, yeah, it wasn't right after.
Okay, so weeks after, and is that when you're talking about Halloween? Sometime around Halloween?
I don't remember, but I know it was way after, and it was around that time period.
Okay, so we'll go on. And one of the things that you weren't paying attention about the white guys in your house up in the attic was that all you wanted was effing drugs. You didn't care what was going on.
Right.
And you did say that those guys were over at the end of October, but before Halloween, right?
Right.
And that was your recollection that it was the end of October, but before Halloween.
Right.
Probably within a week of that? Is that
Yeah,
what
it
you
was
were
around that time.
Okay. October 31st is Halloween.
Right.
And October 31st, it goes without saying, is about 9 days after October 22nd, right?
Right.
And you said that Adam did a trade that day. There were two of them. A shotgun with a scope is what you called it, right?
Right.
And you had said that you thought that they took both of the guns that day, weeks around Halloween, after Adam was over at Kim's house.
Right.
Okay. that both guns left the house that day, right?
Right.
And you told the police that you thought it was Kevin O'Leary who had done that transaction, right?
Right.
Bought one of those guns, right?
Right.
And the other was the driver. So that there was a driver, the two white guys, there was a driver and the guy doing the transaction.
Right.
It was Kevin and somebody else, right?
Right.
That had taken the shotgun and the rifle.
Right.
And I believe you said on direct that you were evicted in November,
Yes.
and that was the end of November, right?
It was the day before Thanksgiving.
Okay. Which was 28th?
Third. 23rd.
23rd was Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Okay. So you were evicted after that and kind of living in the car?
Yep.
And the 23rd of November is less than a month after Halloween, right?
Right.
And so you were saying that Kevin O'Leary, who's also Kevin LaBelle, you now know, took the shotgun and the rifle sometime around Halloween. And if we factor 2 months after Halloween, when that transaction happened, that would be in December, right?
Right.
And 2 months after you're saying Kevin O'Leary got the rifle and the shotgun, you were living in your car
Right.
with Adam.
Right.
Another thing that you told the police was your belief that Chris had a locked place for the gun, right?
Right.
Because you sort of knew that Chris had guns because he liked to go hunting.
Right.
And it was your understanding from the conversations that you were overhearing, at least at Chris, that the guns were in a locked place, right?
Right.
You didn't know where, right?
No.
And they were clearly not in an obvious place when you walk in.
Right.
And Adam, I think, I keep sipping here. Please feel free to have water as well. So, where was I? Sorry. Adam would sometimes, after you came home from work at 2, you all would be there with the kids for a bit, and then in the evening, Adam, because he had a car, would leave because he might be able to drive people around, right?
Right.
And sometimes Kim would call to have Adam come over because he could drive, and if she couldn't leave her child, like you wouldn't like going out with your children
Right.
at night also, that she might have Adam go to pick stuff up for her, right?
Right.
And that had happened several times, right?
Yeah, a couple times.
And it is something, people kind of gave him money for giving him a ride around and stuff like that.
Yep.
Or if they were going riding around to pick up drugs, they might split some of the drugs with Adam to make it worth his while.
Yep.
And so if Adam went to Kim's, as you say that he saw the door unlocked, and you say that he told you that he...
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Gathering my thoughts again, sorry. And he told... So do you want me to start over?
Yes, please.
Okay. So one of the things that you tell police is that Adam told you, after you confronted him about the guns, he admitted to you. Not only that he went over, saw the door open, saw Kim was asleep, and then you say when you confronted him, he said that he searched around and found the guns and put them in his car, and then woke Kim up.
Yes.
Did you ask him why he woke her up?
No.
Okay. And the first thing that she says when she wakes up, according to this story that you say Adam gave you, where are my guns? She was freaking out about the missing guns, right?
Yeah, it took her a little bit to see that they were gone, but yeah, she was freaking out that same night.
Why do you say that?
What? I don't understand. What do you mean?
Why do you say it took her a little bit to see that the guns were gone?
Because she woke up and she obviously was looking around to see if anything was missing
Okay.
because her door was open and she
Okay.
fell asleep.
So Adam wakes her up. Now you're saying Adam tells her that her door had been open? Because she was expecting Adam, right?
Yeah, but it was wide open. It wasn't just unlocked. It was wide open, he said.
Do you know if she saw that?
No.
You're just sort of filling in stuff that seems to make sense, right?
No.
Adam didn't tell you she looked around the house and for things missing, right?
Right.
Okay. Adam didn't tell you that he told her the door was open, right?
Yes, he did.
He told you that he told Kim that her
Door was
open.
wide open, yes.
Okay.
He woke her up and said the door was wide open. And she was sleeping. She was passed out.
Okay. By the way, you said that you are, your drug of choice was heroin and what was the other?
Crack.
Crack. And heroin kind of lays you low, right?
Right.
You sort of don't want to really do anything, but you're enjoying the experience of not doing anything, right?
I guess. Or you're just sick, so it makes you not sick anymore.
Okay. So when you're feeling dope sick, a little bit of heroin can make you feel better.
Right.
And crack is kind of the opposite effect, right?
Right.
And heroin can act, I mean, you can get dope sick with crack if you don't have it and you're coming down from it, right?
If you use a lot of it.
Yeah, and it can leave you pretty wired, right?
Yes.
And that can be a pretty difficult experience too, right?
It depends.
Well,
But yeah.
Okay. It can be a difficult experience, right?
Right.
And a little bit of heroin can just sort of take that edge off too, right?
Right.
Now, you talked about your friend Tabitha Scott. You told Tabitha, after June 3rd, talking to the police, and you're back out on the streets,
Mm-hmm.
and you see Tabitha Scott, right?
Right.
And you tell her that Ish and Manny brought the guns over to the house.
Right.
And that was after June 3rd, right?
Right.
Now, I'm going to show you a copy of what has been marked. States show you 3 exhibits. I don't know if you have seen these before, but they're full exhibits in this case. One is States 13, the other is States 14, and the other is States 17. I don't know, have you seen these before?
I haven't seen these.
Okay. I'm just going to ask you real quick if you could read out loud what the date and time is of the, do you recognize that to be a phone screen, by the way? Screenshot?
Yes.
Okay. The date and time at the bottom of that phone screenshot?
October 3rd, 2019 at 10:52 a.m.
10:52, okay. I'm going to show you States 14, and can you read the date and time in the middle of that screenshot?
October 3rd, 2019, 11:14 a.m.
Okay. And then I'm going to show you States Exhibit 17, and can you read the time in the middle of that screenshot, date and time?
October 4th or October 3rd? October 3rd, 2019, 3:44
Okay.
p.m.
And what is the text message right before that date and time?
Yo, you missed out.
Okay. So, the perjury charges that you're spending time for right now, those are not related to the gun case, right?
Right.
And you described the sentence that you got on direct, and it was, one of them was a 3.5 to 7 suspended, and it's suspended for 10 years.
Right.
And, sorry, the other was 3.5 to 7 with the ability to suspend 1.5 years, right?
Right.
Which would mean that you spend 2 years behind the walls,
Right.
and you also got credit for the
Pre-trial.
Pre-trial, right?
Yes.
So with the time that you already spent in jail, you would be doing a total amount of 2 years incarcerated behind the walls.
Right.
And if you did, that's assuming that you did what you were supposed to do to get the 1.5 years off, right?
Right.
And then you're on parole, right?
Right.
So in sentencing, there's a bottom number and a top number, and the bottom is generally how much time you're behind the walls.
Right.
And then you are, if all goes well, released on parole.
Right.
And that if you have problems while you're on parole, you can go back and be incarcerated up to a grand total of 7 years max.
Right.
So you'll never do more than 7 years, but you can get out from behind the walls in 2 years.
Right.
And on the suspended time, that is, I think I heard you say suspended for 10 years.
Yes.
So you don't do anything, any incarcerated time on that sentence, right?
Right.
So when the state asked you, was that the maximum sentence that you could get on these charges? I mean, the maximum sentences were 3.5 to 7 on each,
Right.
right? The maximum sentence was 3.5 to 7 with 3.5 incarcerated, plus another 3.5 to 7 incarcerated, right?
Right.
for a grand total of potential incarcerated time of 7 years, right?
Right.
And so you expect or are working towards and hoping for no more than a total of 2 years behind the walls.
Right.
And when you talked to the police on June 3rd, you had that proffer agreement, right?
Right.
And that proffer agreement was your agreement to tell the truth also, right?
Right.
And that if you would hope that this would be the outcome by telling the police what you told them on June 3rd, that you would work things out for less than the maximum sentences.
Right.
And you testified on direct for the state, and then I brought up some questions about what you said in June 3rd, right?
Right.
And there were some differences, right?
Right.
And they can be accounted for maybe by memory, right?
Right.
And the fact that you were in a fog of drugs back in October of 2019.
Correct. There was a lot going on.
Yeah, there was quite the fog of drugs back then for you, right?
Yes. But there was a lot going on, not just drugs.
Okay. In October of 2019, there was a lot going on.
Yes.
And you were into drugs.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Sustained. You can move.
Okay.
Ask the next question.
Okay. And one thing I didn't talk about was the cameras. You said that Kim told you that there were cameras that showed who was there that night,
Right.
right? And the police were going to get them, right?
Right.
So it wasn't some elaborate thing about there were cameras. She just said the police were going to get them, right?
Right. She said there was cameras. Her neighbors had cameras.
Pardon?
She said that her neighbors had cameras, and she was going to ask them for them so that the police can get the footage of the videos.
Okay. And your reaction to that was, good, you want to find out who took your guns, right?
Right.
Okay. I may have a moment, Your Honor. I may be done.
Kayla, you were asked about some differences between your statement back in June 3rd and your testimony today. And you were asked what those differences could be attributed to. Do you remember that from Attorney Smith?
Yes.
Do you think my reading comprehension could be one of the reasons for a difference like that?
No.
Maybe?
Well, maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Sustained.
So you were asked specific.
Right, actually.
Sustained. You're to ignore the last question and answer.
So you were asked specifically on cross-examination by Attorney Smith if you testify, or if your statement from June 3rd was that both guns left the house that day. Do you remember her asking you that?
Yes.
And she told you that you said yes, or I think so. Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Okay, and so is that what you remember saying?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna show you, Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes?
For what purpose? Then first you ask.
You said I may approach.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
So Kayla, I'm gonna ask that you read, starting here, with MR,
Yeah.
and you go through to right here.
Okay. I said, okay. Oh, I was asked, okay, so both guns left the house that day. And I said, I think so. And the other person said that. And I said, I'm not like 100% sure, but I remember, yeah, because it was wrapped in a sheet. And they said a sheet, and I said, yeah, a sheet and a blanket. And they said, okay, and when do you think this time frame was? Like, how far, how long after? And I said, it happened in the summertime. No, it was in the fall because it was October.
Perfect. So you said you're not 100% sure if both guns left the house that day?
Right.
Does that refresh your memory of that event?
Yes.
Are you sure that both guns left the house that day?
No.
No. And actually, in your statement, you go on to discuss whether both guns left the house that day. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And just like you said here, you described 2 incidents.
Right.
And with investigators, you talked about an incident with Kevin O'Leary, the person that you knew as Kevin O'Leary.
Right.
Right. And the investigators asked you, do you remember the investigators asking you who else the defendant offered the guns to?
Yes.
And you told them Manny, Ish, Mark.
Sustained.
Who did you tell them the defendant offered the guns to?
Ish, Manny, Mark, and Tone. And I don't remember the rest.
And do you remember telling officers that the defendant?
Sustained.
And investigators asked you, so both guns couldn't have left the home that day if he was still offering it to people.
Sustained.
Were you able to clarify whether both guns left the house that day during your June 3rd interview?
No,
And why is that?
because I don't remember if they both left or if one left or that whole situation, because I also got told about Kevin O'Leary being Kevin LaBelle, but I remember the 2 white guys that came in, neither one of them was Kevin O'Leary or Kevin LaBelle.
Okay. And Attorney Smith asked you about the discovery that you received before going to your June 3rd meeting.
Yes.
And I think did you say your lawyer had highlighted a few things?
Yes.
Did he highlight the names of people?
Yes.
Okay. So you knew Kevin as Kevin O'Leary?
Yes.
And one of the things he highlighted for you, was one of the things that he highlighted for you the name of Kevin?
Sustained. Counsel approach.
Did you know Kevin's last name at the time, before your proffer?
No.
Did you know Manny's last name or his first name at the time?
I don't remember his name.
Did you know Ish's full name at the time?
No.
Did you know Mike's full name at the time?
No.
Are those things that your attorney highlighted for you?
Yes.
You testified on cross-examination that you didn't touch those guns.
Right.
And I think you said that on direct as well.
Yes.
You also said that you didn't possess those guns, both on direct and on cross.
Correct.
And I think Attorney Smith also asked you if you retained the guns on cross-examination. And what did you say to that?
No.
Who did?
Adam.
Who possessed those guns?
Adam.
Who retained those guns?
Adam.
Who stole those guns?
Adam.
And he told you that he stole those guns.
Yes.
Did he tell you that he stole those guns?
Yes.
So on your direct examination, you talked about the first statement that the defendant told you. And I want to clarify between the first statement and his admission to you of what he'd done. In his first statement, did he tell you that Kim Frayne was sleeping when he went to her home?
Overruled. Go ahead.
Sorry, let me ask that again. In his first statement, did he tell you that Kim Frayne was sleeping when he went into her home?
Yes.
In his first statement, did he tell you that those guns were stolen?
Overruled.
Sorry, let me ask that again. In his first statement, did he tell you that the guns were stolen when he went into her home?
I don't remember if he said that or not.
Missing.
Yes.
In his second statement, he told you that he stole. Did he tell you that he stole the guns?
Yes.
In his second statement, did he tell you that she was sleeping when he stole the guns?
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
Anything further, Attorney Smith? When you were talking with me before the redirect, we talked about a transaction that you said was two white guys and one was the driver
Yes.
and the other was doing the transaction, right? And that was a transaction that you say occurred in the attic, right?
Yes.
Two white guys, one a driver and one doing the transaction, right?
Right.
And you actually called it a transaction, right?
Right.
And then when you were talking about Kevin O'Leary to the police, you were talking about Kevin coming over and wanting to buy the gun.
Yes.
And when they asked if he ever bought it, you said the other guys came down and did the transaction. They were wrapped in sheets. They were, I'm pretty sure they left with them that day. I thought they did anyway, right?
Right.
And that's a different time than the prosecutor was pointing out about the white guys, one a driver and one doing the transaction, leaving with both guns that day, right?
That's the same incident.
Right.
Yes.
That was the second time that you told the police that they left with the guns that day, right?
Right.
And days, we talked about a little bit of the drug activities. Days don't really set out to you, right?
Right.
And one of the things that the prosecutor asked about was Adam's, I think he called it first and second statement.
Yes.
And the door wide open, the dog didn't bark, and what
woke up and the guns were missing. The door wide open and the dogs didn't bark. You also knew that from Kim Frain's statement in discovery, right?
No,
That was something that was in the discovery in this case, right?
I don't know. I didn't get to see that.
Okay, okay. And the event with Kevin O'Leary, I think that you said it was before Halloween, around that time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Your Honor, I'd ask, excuse me, I'd ask that this witness be excused.
Any objection?
If
Counsel, why don't you approach for 1 minute?
Ma'am, if you would just stay put for 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch break now, so if you would come back at 1:25, I would expect that we would start up again at 1:30. As I have reminded you throughout this case, make sure that you do not discuss the case with each other or with anyone else. Don't talk about the case. Don't do any independent research. Don't look up any names or places. Don't look up the law. You'll get that in the court's instructions, and we'll see you in about an hour. So we should start up at 1:30. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, for jury.
I have a question.
Paul's gonna be down there.
All right, should we go upstairs? I don't know what order you want to do that in, but actually, counsel, can I see you at the bench for just a minute?
You're listening to continuing coverage in the trial of Adam Montgomery. That wraps up segment number 4. There is more to come. Press subscribe so you don't miss any of it. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.